Good evening. My name is Barkha Dutt, and you're watching The Mojo Story, our independent digital platform that does a deep dive every day on the issues that mainstream media often ignores. On the program today, we keep our eye on the farmers' protest, but also the politics of it. We are now seeing a new controversy emerge after the government basically indicated that there would be no winter session of Parliament. The government argued that all stakeholders had been consulted, but in fact, the opposition, including parties like the Congress and the Trinamool Congress, are insisting that they were not taken into confidence before such a decision was taken. COVID is being cited as the reason for not holding a winter session of Parliament, but the opposition parties are arguing that the real reason is that there's an ongoing farmers' protest in the farm legislation, and the government does not want to face Parliament at such a moment when basically the farmers are fighting a do or die battle against the government. On the program today, we're looking now at the politics of no Parliament session in this winter. And let me introduce our panel today. We're joined by Saugata Roy, senior leader of the Trinamool Congress. We're also joined by Tuhin Sinha, who's a member of the BJP, as well as an author and a commentator. And we're joined by Radhika Ramaseshan, veteran journalist and columnist. I'll start with you, Saugata, if I may. What is the precise problem? Because, it's kind of confusing because earlier when Parliament was not disbursed fast enough, the Trinamool was among the parties that said that the government was playing with lives, that basically the government was more interested in saving its assemblies in states like Madhya Pradesh, that it carried on with Parliament longer than it should have. Now when the government is saying because of COVID there will be no winter session, parties like yours are objecting. Why is that?
No, number one is we did protest when the Parliament session in March was being extended. And we knew it was because of Trump's visit to India and also because they wanted to bring down the Madhya Pradesh government. Now, already during the COVID pandemic, we've had a Parliament session, restricted one, nevertheless, but a Parliament session with all precautions taken. Now, the country faces a host of problems, including the farmers' agitation, which has been going on for days and threatens to escalate. There is something that needs to be discussed because the farmers are wanting withdrawal of all the three bills, whereas the government says that they'll bring in amendments. That can only be done through the Parliament session. Number two, the question of the vaccine for COVID is also very relevant, how the vaccine will be distributed state-wise and to persons and at what costs. That also needs to be discussed in Parliament. Now that we've had a Parliament session, the problem of COVID and how to tackle it in Parliament is gone. Today I met the speaker informally and he told me that the session will be held only towards the end of January. There will be no winter session, though some parties had demanded a 7-day winter session. The government felt that a 7-day winter session was not efficacious. So they said that they will have a longer Parliament session in January. Since I met the speaker informally, Sudeep Bandyopadhyay was also there. I did not lodge a formal protest, but we do want the Parliament. We did want the Parliament session to be held sometime in December, the traditional winter session.
So what do you think is actually going on here? What do you think is actually going on? What do you think is actually going on here? You're basically alleging that the government
does not want to. The government does not want to face the Parliament. May I say that the Modi government is taking advantage of the still continuing pandemic to postpone Parliament so that they can take all the decisions unilaterally without going through the rigmaroles of democracy. And that's why they're postponing the Parliament.
Okay.
There seems to be no other logical reason. If they could have held it in October, they could have held it now. There was no problem. Even if there was a 7-day Parliament session, what was the harm? At least the normal practice of having a winter session would not be discussed. They do not want to face the Parliament. They do not want to face the anger of the farmers do not want to face the COVID vaccine distribution problem and the economic ills ailing the country. They are avoiding it. That's the simple reason why they are not having a parliament.
Okay, let me get Radhika to come in here. Radhika, obviously the farmers' protest has created a challenge for the government that it perhaps underestimated, it did not anticipate. We're seeing the kind of sustained capacity. One of the farmers on my program yesterday was saying कि हम या जीत के जाएंगे या हम अपनी जान कुर्बान करके जाएंगे, which may sound like a Hindi film dialogue, but not when you consider the fact that we're now looking at the 20th day of these continuous protests. So I can see some merit in what the opposition is saying, that the government basically wants to duck the farmers' issues. But the opposition is also in a bind. The opposition argued the equal and opposite side of this debate a few months ago when it believed that the government was putting politics ahead of COVID. The government can point to those instances and therefore it say that, look, now you've just completely conveniently changed your position because in fact you want to do politics over the farmers' issues and now you don't care about COVID. When we were extending the parliament session, you said parliament should not be held. Now because you want to put us on the mat, you have forgotten COVID. So do you think both sides are actually being hypocritical?
Well, both sides are being hypocritical. It's a question of degree. I think the government is being more hypocritical than the opposition. True, in March, the opposition wanted to truncate the session, but the government wouldn't, for whatever reason. I mean, Saugata Roy is saying it's because of the Madhya Pradesh government. I'm not sure. Then, of course, the government went ahead and had a monsoon session, albeit a shorter one. But let's not forget the pandemic was raging at that point, and still, parliamentarians were ready to take all the safety precautions. Parliament was put in place, to take care of exigencies and so on. And the government went ahead and held a session in which it, of course, passed those farm bills without scrutiny, without debate, without whatever. Now, it looks like the government certainly wants to avoid, because of this is probably the biggest challenge that Modi has faced in his first and second tenures, while the government could live with the CAA protests because, politically they were beneficial to quite a large extent to the BJP. This is becoming, a little too much, too much of a hot potato, because I think, as you rightly said, they didn't anticipate that the farmers would hold out so valorously for so long, forget whether there are foot massagers or pizzas or whatever being served. I'm talking about the spirit of endurance. And, they are really kind of sitting it out and standing it out and not giving in one bit. It is the government which looks like it may have to climb down a bit in bits and pieces here and there, although everybody is stating that the laws will not be repealed. Now, the question is that if there was a parliament session, imagine a scenario, the government, of course, the opposition would rightly demand a discussion on the implications, the effects of the farm law. It would demand a detailed statement from the government on the vaccine rollout program, because there is some confusion regarding that, and more importantly, on what is the status of the pandemic, state-wise figures, death toll, because in the preceding months there has been some confusion even about the data on the fatalities that were given to us. So, all in all, it wouldn't have been a very happy scenario for the government. But then every government, including the Modi government, has faced problems in the past. It's not that every parliament session is held in very optimistic circumstances or circumstances that suit the government. The point is that you have to kind of bear it out, answer. And it's not that the government will not have answers. Of course, they will have answers.
What do you think, Radhika, should happen? Before I get Tuhin, what do you think should happen? Do you believe the winter session of Parliament should have happened? There were also proposals of calling a special one-day Parliament session. For example, there is a middle ground, and that's what I'll put to Tuhin just now. Have a one-day session. To discuss the farm legislation threadbare. Why not at least that?
Of course, because the government has put up its defenses, and some of the arguments do sound a bit convincing. You can't sort of trash everything that is coming from the government as propaganda. So the government should have called a session, heard out the opposition, put its point of view, and then try and evolve some kind of a consensus. But this NDA is not really known to be a consensus kind of entity. But at least both sides would have put forth their points of view. So I think Barkha session should have been held shorter, maybe. And as we saw during the monsoon session, it's possible to take the all the precautions. I mean, there is enough and more infrastructure to take care of that, to enforce hygiene protocol, safety protocol, and so on. So there is really no reason to not hold a session.
Let me bring in Tuhin at this point. Tuhin, let me bring you right into this conversation at this moment, and ask you to respond to the opposition charge कि COVID तो सिर्फ बहाना है. Basically, that's what the opposition is in fact saying.
From January 2015, as you are aware, the budget session of Parliament has been advanced to January end instead of February end. So which technically means that from the end of the winter session, which is December end, till the start of the budget session, there is a gap of merely 4 weeks, which and to do away with the winter session, if you ask me, is not such an unnatural thing at this point of time, given the unnatural crisis that we have faced in the last 1 year. So that's point number one. I don't see a big deal. Point number two, when we had the session last time, of all people, Rahul Gandhi was missing. He gave the excuse that he had he had to take his mother for a checkup, medical checkup. But I'm sure.
Why do you think it was an excuse?
No, that was a checkup, I believe, right? That was not an operation. That was not a surgery.
Yeah.
So,
okay, go ahead.
For those 8 or 9 days when the session was was taking place, I'm sure that could have been adjusted had he been so serious about it. Again, at the same time, when the farm laws discussion was taking place, of all parties, NCP and Shiv Sena decided to back out of that discussion. Let me also remind you that on the very first day of the session, some 27 MPs were detected with a virus, and continuously the number only escalated. You need to take into account, Barkha. See, you have interviewed a lot of politicians, you have met a lot of politicians. It's not merely the politicians. In India, the culture is such that just because the session is taking place, just because a certain MP is in Delhi, there are probably 50 people who land up, despite being told that you should not meet the certain MP on a given day, they land up to meet him. While the MP can be taken care of well, what about the other people who, become a victim of the virus? Finally, Delhi, as you are aware, has already experienced the third wave of the virus. Now, the medical community has already warned that if stringent measures are not taken, some 15,000 cases will be reported every day. Now, in this situation, to prolong or to do away with the session for merely a month, I don't see any big deal in it.
So let me take some questions now from our audience, and I'll start with you, Tuhin. Basically, we have a question from S. Sahu who says, if the parliament session could be held when the pandemic was at its peak, what is the problem now? There's another question from Sumit Mukherjee who says it's very difficult to find any government in the past, who would even raise real issues. Only speeches, hollow talk, and baseless formulas all the time. Then, of course, there's another question, and I think this is the key, and I want Radhika and Saugata to respond to that. What is the reason to cancel the parliament session? Why can't parliament function online, just like the rest of the world does, just like schools do, just like all of us do? Right? So I think, Tuhin, I'll start with asking your response to this, and then I'll get Saugata to respond.
Well, there is a concrete plan for an expanded budget session, I would believe, in Jan end, which is where a lot of other bills would be coming up, apart from the presentation of the budget. So like I said, a gap of a month does not make such a big difference unless there was a pressing bill which had to be passed. And most of the important bills, whether it was farm laws, whether it was amendment which had to do with the NGO funding, all of these had come up in the belated monsoon session. So had there been a national urgency or a bill which had to be passed at this point of time, we would have considered that. But since we don't see an urgency to prolong it or to do away with for a month, I don't think there was anything wrong with it. And Barkha, let me also remind you, last time the monsoon session was held in September, there was similar protest, or there was a similar angst on the issue of why was the question are not there. No, there are at least 4 instances similarly when the question hour has been done away with, including in 1976 for no rhyme or reason, where the parliament had assembled for a very...
Why can't you do it online? You haven't answered the question. Why can't parliament function online? If our children can study in schools online, parliament can't function online. Why do you need to scrap the session?
Well, had the budget session not been planned in Jan end, certainly that could have been considered seriously. But I think the budget session is very much on in Jan end, and that is one of the reasons, like I mentioned right at the start, a delay of a month at this point of time does not seem like a
I
big
think
deal.
Radhika wanted to come in there, and then Radhika, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a very plausible argument because budget sessions for the last few sessions have been held at the end of January, despite which you have winter sessions. I mean, surely they could have rescheduled the winter session to the first and the second week of December and adjourn it well before Christmas. I mean, the normal practice is to adjourn it just a couple of days before Christmas. They could have adjourned it a week, 10 days before Christmas, and had a small, shorter session.
Exactly.
As regards bills, every bill is important. You cannot attach a value to a bill and say X is important, Y is not important. I mean, I have some of the bills, DNA technology use and regulation bill, which has been referred to a parliament committee. I mean, this would impinge on a lot of people, this particular bill. There is arbitration and conciliation amendment, which is an ordinance 2020. Yeah. Commission for Air Quality Management and NCR and Adjoining Areas Ordinance 2020. Why is this not important? It's still an ordinance. Salaries and allowances of ministers, Amendment Ordinance 2020. These are all ordinances. There is a Personal Data Protection Bill, which is pending since 2019, and there's a River Water Dispute Bill, Amendment Bill pending since 2019. These are all very important. While they may not impact Tuhin, I'm sure there are several states which would be interested in seeing these bills become law.
Let me just get Saugata in, and then Tuhin can respond to all of this. So Saugata, what is the demand? Tuhin will say, how does 1 month make a difference? What would your answer be to that? And why haven't you, for example, asked for an online session instead? That would make people feel that the opposition is not serious either.
No. If we go by to his argument, then if it can be postponed for 1 month, why not postpone it for 1 year? We can have an emergency. We follow the logic of Tuhin's argument. The fact is that the budget session is a budget session where the principal business is presentation of the budget and passage of the budget and the finance bill. The winter session or the other sessions apart from the budget session are normally held to pass legislation and also raise matters of urgent public importance. Now, there are several, as Radhika correctly pointed out, there are several important legislations pending which ought to have been passed. But more than that, think of the farmer star. If the government is proposing to the farmers that they want amendment to the farm bills, they've called parliament and come forward with their arguments, with their presentation. And we could have asked for repeal or withdrawal of all the bills. Yeah. This was most necessary, and if even now the government wants to assure the farmers, the best way is to call a session of parliament and then present whatever legislative proposals they have.
What are you all planning to do about it? What are you all planning to do about it?
The parties have to take a decision on postponing the session, but the strange thing is that in a parliamentary democracy, the government does not want to hold a session. Even if we hold 100 demonstrations outside, the fact will not change. The session will not be held. After all, the clearance must come from the government. But you have to remember that the convention in parliament has been to have a budget session, a monsoon session, and a winter session. Now, if a government wants to do away with democratic norms or conventions, it's free to do so at its own peril. Why are they dispensing with a whole session, the winter session? That is something we object strongly. Maybe there will be some protests, etc., etc. But the main thing, the main protest is taking place on the doors of Delhi. All the roads leading to Delhi are blocked. The government does not even care to call a session of the parliament to discuss the farmer and bring their legislative proposals on the farm laws before the parliament. That I
So
find
that
is
was
very
that
find is trying to get away from democracy, and that has been the attitude of the Narendra Modi government all along. One party, one religion, one country. All these slogans have been given by them, and that is where we are traveling towards. The country does not rise up in protest, then bad times ahead of us.
Okay, let me bring in Tuhin on a very important question. If COVID is really the concern, then should you not be concerned? Should the BJP and everybody not be concerned that farmers in mass numbers are congregating in the capital? Because that's the real danger, by the way. Mass gatherings are the danger, and there is a mass gathering of farmers taking place because they believe that the COVID risk is one that they're worth that's worth taking. Given what they're up against, that they're fighting for their existence, as they call it. Now, if COVID is really the concern, is that concern only about MPs for MPs? Or is it also COVID concern about citizens? Because if COVID is really the concern driving this decision, then isn't it better, Tuhin, to hold a one-day session of parliament, address the farmers' issues, and so that they're not exposing themselves to COVID? Is COVID really a concern for the government?
So, as far as the protests of the farmers are concerned, we have been continuously engaging with them from the 3rd of December. We have given them certain assurances if they still continue to come in large numbers. And mind you, many of them are large landowners, many of them are intermediaries, they're not farmers. So it is their choice. When it comes to parliament, again, I have explained, when there was a discussion on the farm bill, when the bill was being presented, most of the parties, most of the opposition parties, most of the parties who are protesting now were not to be seen in parliament. So that has been a pattern, that has been a tendency for a very long time. They just use the parliament session to browbeat. We have never shied away from a parliament session, but they use it for not having a parliament session to browbeat the government. So,
but
when it comes to TMC, let me assure you that we are equally disappointed at the session not taking place because the TMC needs to be grilled in parliament for the ever failing law and order situation in Bengal. So we are as disappointed. And finally, let me also remind you that given all the other countries, especially the larger countries, when you look at US, if US is still reporting 3,000 deaths today, if we have come down to less than 30,000 cases, which is what the number used to be in June, you somewhere need to credit the government for the way we have controlled the pandemic. And I think you need to trust the government when we say that in a month's time, and a full-fledged session, the budget session is going to take place, which will address many of the bills, where all the bills which have been pending will come up for discussion.
You've gone to Bengal, and I'll let Saugata Roy respond to that. But I'm asking you a specific question again. What was the harm in holding a one-day special online session of Parliament to discuss the farm laws, given that COVID is being cited as the concern and the farmers are potentially risking COVID to fight a larger battle? If COVID is really the concern, that concern should be as much for citizens as it is for MPs themselves, right, Tuhin?
Well, if I were the Speaker of the Lok Sabha, I would have had a definitive answer to it. But like I have said, when it comes to the farm laws, we've already explained our position. There will be no going back on it because the reforms have been pending for the last 15 years. They have been promised at some point of time or the other by all political parties. Yes, there will be amendments which have been discussed, but if the farmers, and again, mind you, all of them are not farmers, if they insist that they will not bend down on anything less than the entire act being repealed, that is unfortunately something we can't let happen. Tomorrow, I mean, I'm asking you, can the 1991 reforms be repealed at this point of time? Well, could they be repealed even then?
Okay, you've raised an interesting question, and let me take that to Saugata Roy. And I think there is a valid question here that let's say there were to be a one-day session, special session convened online, offline, whatever way to discuss the farm laws. If the starting point of the government is that, look, we are willing to address specific concerns, but we are not going to repeal these laws, what would be the purpose of this session? And therefore, what is the tearing hurry?
Number one, Barkha, I would agree to your proposal of having an online session, but it can't be for one day. It cannot be a show thing. Session should be at least for 1 week, where we discuss issues threadbare and where we can take on the central BJP for really pouncing on Bengal with all their outside leaders, their money and central forces to defeat democracy there. But that's another question.
What do you mean by outside leaders?
Main question
sorry to stay on Bengal. Sorry to stay on Bengal.
People
Sorry
who
to
come
stay
from
on
Delhi
Bengal
into
for a
Bengal,
second, but the governor
who parachute people from Himachal like Nadda and from Gujarat like Amit Shah or Kailash from Madhya Pradesh, they are parachuting into Bengal for any party in state election. It's not an all India election. It's a state election.
It's one country.
So,
it's one country.
It's one country, but it's Barkha. It's not very common for people from all over to gather in a single state to pressurize, to bully a state government which is already in place. Elections have not yet been announced. Look at the busy schedule of the BJP leaders. The Home Minister went there once. He's not concerned about the security of the country. He's concerned only about capturing Bengal. That's not the issue. But that's not the issue. I want to say that if the government does not want to repeal the bills, let them come to Parliament and say that they do not. And if they have alternative proposals, let them come to Parliament and say, propose those alternatives to the farm laws. They've already agreed that there is much to be changed about the farm laws. They have pointed out specific amendments that they want to bring. Why don't they do it before Parliament instead of saying it on here? And we read in the paper that Narendra Singh Tomar and Rajnath Singh has talked to the farmers. If they can talk to the farmers, why can't they talk to members of Parliament? It's a strange logic that the government will.
Sir, let me just ask you a question.
But maybe this is the BJP principle that my way or the highway. So they want their ways to go on. But we strongly protest. We still want Parliament session to be held. Even if, according to your suggestion, it be held online, or a full-fledged Parliament session for 7 days, at least with the precaution that we had put in Parliament in the last session. This is no way that a government should function. And BJP has nothing to defend themselves. Last Parliament session, the strange thing. Government, even if it has Parliament, last Parliament, they passed 3 labor laws.
Okay, sir, I have to interrupt you now.
I've heard you. Forcible passage of the farm, they went ahead and passed 2 labor laws which are on anti-labor. This is the government for you.
Okay, hang on. Let me get Tuhin in. I don't know if Saugata Roy can hear me, and I'll go back to my question to him. But let me ask you, Tuhin. Bengal has got mixed with farmers. I want your response, and then I'll ask my question about what the governor said to Saugata. Go ahead, Tuhin.
First of all, I'm very surprised at the way Saugata is saying he's calling people from outside Bengal outsiders. Is that what your definition of federalism is? And in that case, won't you consider yourself outsider in Delhi? This should not be the discussion, whatever be the topic. So please don't call us outsiders. Point number 1. Point number 2, I think whether it is a 1-day session or a 5-day session, like I said, if you feel that the session had to be called for repealing the farm laws, that is something we have stated very unequivocally. The repealing of laws is not going to happen. The discussion with farmers is anyway taking place, and the Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister, has reiterated that it will continue to take place till the concerns of the farmers are addressed.
Okay, let me get Saugata in. Saugata.
He can't meet the farmers here.
Yes, Saugata.
He's going to touch and address the farmers.
Yes. Two points. One, to what Tuhin has said. The other, my question. You brought up what the governor has said. This outsider-insider debate that you brought into Bengal. Is this democratic? I asked you this because you've accused the government of violating democratic convention. Are you also not going against democratic convention by creating an outsider-insider template?
It's in one country. And when elections are announced, campaign starts, BJP can bring all its heavyweights, lightweights into Bengal. But I find it very foreboding that they must bring all their heavyweights on the way to an election when election has not been announced. This is a way to bully the state government. This is a way to threaten the state government officials. This is a way to create an atmosphere of fear among the people in the state. Look here, we have come from all over the country. We'll steamroll you if you don't vote for us. That is the message that is being sought to be sent. Tupai's BJP leaders, they are being given central security, CISF commandos to guard.
You're calling them two paisa. You're calling them two paisa BJP leaders. That's not a very democratic way to talk about your colleagues.
Yes, two
Sir, you're saying two paisa BJP leaders, right? Is that a very democratic way to talk?
Central security.
No, but is that a democratic way to talk?
Is that a democratic way?
Since this is a debate, about... Is this a democratic way to talk?
I said two paisa is a democratic one.
Okay.
You think that?
No, I think political parties are all guided by self-interest, and they all change positions depending on where their self-interest is, if you ask me what I really think. But I want to come back to what's happening with Parliament, since it's been made into a debate about democracy and the government not respecting democratic conventions. There, I would say there should have been a session. Because, Radhika, the question on our screen is, there's no answer to whether COVID is a real concern. If election rallies in large numbers are okay, how is Parliament not okay?
Exactly. I mean, in Delhi, every night, every evening, I hear this band, Baja Barat. Weddings are going on in full swing. COVID cases are being reported from the wedding guests at the wedding venues, people getting the virus. So if all this is being allowed in full swing, then what is the harm in calling Parliament? With all the restrictions, in the last monsoon session, there was very limited access to journalists. Central Hall was not open to journalists. Fair enough. I mean, impose every measure that you want, but for God's sake, let the House function. I mean, let the BJP say its piece on West Bengal and, the throttling of democracy or whatever it wants to say. Let the Trinamool answer. Let us have a discussion on the farmers' protests. Let the government say what it wants to, because Barkha, the arguments, the counter arguments have been coming out in bits and pieces from the NDA, from the BJP. So let the government give a very comprehensive perspective on what it thinks is right about the farm laws and why it wants them to stay. I mean, I would like to hear a proper sort of comprehensive viewpoint, whether from the agricultural minister or the home minister or the prime minister, ideally the prime minister, but hold one, please. And there are other issues. I mean, I am very keen to know how the whole vaccine schedule is going to be rolled out, in what form, which vaccine are we finally sort of going to be, disseminating. So these are all very important issues, and it was very important for this session to take place.
Okay, I need to take final comments now. And Tuhin, I'll start with you. If COVID is indeed the concern, then we are at that point where we should be talking about a vaccine. There is the farm laws, but there's also the vaccine to talk about, right? And why are we not using this moment? This is a moment when the government needs to be talking to people. Parliament is the forum for that. It's not just a way for MPs to talk to each other. It's also a way for the country to hear its politicians and all shades of opinion. And we need that right now. We need that on the farm laws. We need that on the state of COVID. We need that on the vaccines. And by the way, we need that on what's happening in Ladakh, the great forgotten story of our time, the absolutely massive military buildup that has taken place to combat the Chinese.
Well, absolutely. And that is the reason the Honorable Prime Minister has been regularly having these all-party meetings and meetings with all the CMs. I don't know how much the CM of Bengal or how much the CM of Maharashtra has contributed to those meetings where the COVID vaccination plan was being discussed. And also, it is work in progress. The Health Ministry is very closely working with different state governments and municipal corporations. So it is work in progress. The moment the plan is finalized, the moment we have a very clear blueprint, that will be shared with the rest of the country. You can rest assured about that. But I don't think that by any means indicates that there has been a leeway insofar as drawing up the vaccination plan is concerned. Because if you look at it, the Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi was the first leader, first elected leader, or across the globe. I've been following the COVID crisis. I don't think any other president or prime minister has personally visited the manufacturing site of the vaccine. Now, he's not a scientist. The entire idea of the visit was
why not come and share that with Parliament? Why not come in? Exactly. So why not come and share that with Parliament?
He would share it
by him on a national rollout of the vaccine.
I'm sure he has shared his thoughts with the Niti Aayog. People have.
Niti Aayog is not.
Mr. V.K. Paul, who's in charge of this, and he's shared it with the health ministry officials. Now he would share it with you also once there is the same level of trust.
Okay.
But I'm sure things are being done at their level.
Saugata Roy, I'll give Radhika the last word, but I'll let you come in on that because we've conflated Bengal with farmers. There's COVID in China. There's so much happening. My question to you still remains, after accusing the government of not sort of respecting democratic convention, what are you planning to do exactly beyond this perfunctory allegation that you have made today? Is the opposition going to take to the streets like the farmers have? Somehow I just feel we don't see our country's opposition on the ground enough.
See, we are a party limited to West Bengal. So all the protests we can do will be in West Bengal. And we need to sit down in our party and take a decision. The other opposition party, mainly the big opposition party, Congress, to get their act together and decide. But this decision, Barkha, as always, we've been on time. Just today, it was finally announced that the Parliament winter session will not be held. Yes. Today, fortunately, I met the Speaker and confirmed that it's not going to be held. It will be held somewhere in January. So you give the opposition party some time, and maybe then you can have another
show. All right, I'll give Radhika the last word.
We can have another show and we can discuss. But I thank you for your very timely intervention in the matter. As always, you're on time. This is a matter concerning democracy, and the government is giving a go-by to democracy, going for one-party rule, one party, one religion, one country, etc. rule. So at least there should be some protests aired on the air. Thank you very much for
Thank you, Saugata.
giving us the opportunity.
Yeah, we've lived through a very fraught year, and all that people are seeking are assurances from the government on when COVID is going to be contained, how it's going to be contained. Most importantly, whether the vaccines are safe. I mean, there is already a vaccinophobia which is kind of evolving. So and of course the farmers. I mean, they want reassurances from the government, a concrete kind of roadmap. So I think, therefore, the government has passed up an opportunity to fulfill its basic responsibility, its commitment to the people. It's not sufficient to tell to share information with the Niti Aayog or the health ministry officials or chief ministers. It is very important to address people through Parliament. And I think that was a very good forum.
I think we will have to leave it there. I think the thing also to remember is that political parties flip their positions depending on what is convenient for them. So there was a point when the opposition did not want Parliament, and there is a point when the government doesn't want Parliament. But Radhika, you're absolutely right that the people we should be talking about are these people who are out on the streets, sleeping under tractors, sleeping under trucks in the winter cold. Whether or not you agree with them, they are citizens and they're out there. It's the 20th day now. And for Parliament to not be sort of held at this point when there are several critical questions, both about the farm laws or about COVID, does raise all manners of questions that I think what is Parliament for but to raise those questions. So I think that's what we want to leave our viewers with. You get to decide, is the government doing the correct thing in not holding Parliament? And even if the COVID scare is real, the farmers are actually then taking that risk. And last of all, children have studied online all year. Why can't Parliament function online? We leave you with that question. Thank you, Radhika, Tuhin and Saugata. Thank you so much. And see you, our viewers, tomorrow at the same time with another big story. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.